and salutations, dreamers in dreamland. Welcome to the latest edition of Listen to Me. Let me tell you something right now. Everybody's favorite boxing shaman, yours truly, The Dream, has got something special in store for you today. First and foremost, we're going to go over, last weekend's events. Last weekend was filled with boxing, so I'm going to review last weekend. I went 2 for 4 in my picks and my predictions, and we're going to go over that right now. We're going to start with the best fight. We're not going to start with the worst fight. We're going to start on a positive note. We're going to start with the best fight that happened last weekend. And that was, to be honest with you, that was Augustus and Vergil Ortiz. That's a Fight of the Year candidate. That was truly something special that we saw. Congratulations to Vergil Ortiz. He was the victor, stopping Vergil Ortiz, bouncing him off the canvas 5 times total in the fight. Vergil Ortiz was knocked down once himself. The referee, didn't call it a knockdown. Very similarly to the way that when Augustus knocked down Bud Terrence Crawford, the referee seemed to call it a slip, and he did the same thing with Vergil Ortiz. In the second round, Augustus, he was getting into Vergil Ortiz. He was in him. He was all up in him, and he definitely hurt him, stunned him, had him doing the chicken dance, and Vergil Ortiz definitely touched the canvas. However, it was ruled a slip. But in the following round, the third round, Vergil Ortiz, that's when he knocked down Augustus for the first time. Then in the 8th round, which was the final round, that was when Vergil Ortiz knocked down Augustus an additional 4 times, bouncing him off the canvas for a total of 5 times. And after the 5th knockdown, the referee waved it off, said that's it. So congratulations to Vergil Ortiz. I predicted a 7th round knockout, but I predicted a knockout victory for Vergil Ortiz nonetheless, and he did it in the 8th round. So well done, Vergil Ortiz. Now, another fight that I got right was the Fight Camp main event, which was Josh Buatsi and Ricards Balatniks. Now, Ricards Balatniks, let me tell you something. That guy's no joke. He definitely did well. He did a lot better than I thought he would have. I actually predicted a knockout in the 8th round, and it was actually an 11th round knockout, an 11th round stoppage for Joshua Buatsi. And it was not because Ricards Balatniks was not game. Ricards Balatniks, he was as game as they come. He was ready to go, but he got stopped. Joshua Buatsi, did what he had to do and he stopped that guy, but he didn't knock him out cold, but it wasn't a stoppage victory in the 11th round. So congratulations to Joshua Buatsi in victory, and congratulations to Ricards Balatniks for putting on a performance above and beyond what was expected. Truly. He tested Joshua Buatsi. He put his hands all over him. He hurt Joshua Buatsi. He did. And, Joshua Buatsi showed that he's got a chin. And, Joshua Buatsi is definitely not a perfect fighter. But no fighter is a perfect fighter. Nobody walks through the fire unscathed. Even Floyd Mayweather Jr., who people have this strange memory of, like he ran around the ring and he never got hit. That's not true. Floyd Mayweather fought in the pocket. He was definitely a stick and move fighter, but he didn't run. He fought in the pocket and he was very hard to hit. And take a look at the first Marcus Maidana fight. Take a look at the first Luis Castillo fight. Take a look at the Canelo Alvarez fight. Take a look at the Miguel Cotto fight. Floyd Mayweather was not perfect in any of those fights. Out of all those fights that I just mentioned, the Canelo fight, he did blow Canelo away. But Canelo put his hands on him a little bit. But Miguel Cotto put his hands on Floyd Mayweather more. An analogy I like to use for the Floyd Mayweather-Miguel Cotto fight is similar to something that happened in the movie 300. Basically, Leonidas proved that a god can bleed when he made the tall god guy bleed. I forgot the guy's name. Forgive me. I'm not I didn't review 300 before I made this video. But it is an analogy that, kind of sinks in the same. Miguel Cotto proved that Floyd Mayweather, a boxing god, he proved he can bleed. He busted his nose. Floyd Mayweather was bleeding from the nose so profusely that at one point when the camera went to Floyd in the corner, the crowd popped. The crowd was cheering tremendously, popping louder than most of anything you hear at a Floyd Mayweather fight. They popped pretty loud, seeing him bleed. And who made him bleed? Miguel Cotto, with his jab. Yeah, he did. So point being, no fighter is perfect. But Joshua Buatsi's not perfect. But he proved that he can take a shot. He proved that he can go through the fire, and he proved that he has the wherewithal to go through the fire and stop a guy in the 11th round. A dangerous guy. Ricard Bolotniks, that's a dangerous guy. Bolotniks is a dangerous guy. Let me tell you something right now. Anybody who's not prepared steps in the ring with Ricard Bolotniks is going to lose. He's going to lose. He wasn't coming off of I think it was an 8-fight winning streak going into that fight. He wasn't, on an 8-fight winning streak for no reason. Ricard Bolotniks is a guy who brings it, and I got a lot of respect for him. And you know what, Joshua Buatsi, he's moving up even further. I believe, me personally, his next fight should be for a world title. If it were me, and I was Eddie Hearn, I would look to line up Joshua Buatsi against Joe Smith Jr. That's right. Listen, Artur Beterbiev, he's something like 16-0 with 16 knockouts. Maybe 17-0 with 17 knockouts. And he's a unified champion. He is the authority at light heavyweight right now. Dimitri Bivol, all respect to him. He's right behind Beterbiev in my opinion. Look, he holds one title. He's undefeated in his own right. He has a good knockout percentage. He's more of a boxer, than Beterbiev. But he doesn't quite, he doesn't pack quite the same punch. But make no mistake about it, Dimitri Bivol, he'll get you out of there. He'll knock you out. Joe Smith Jr. is a guy who's got a lot of power. He's the last remaining champion at 175 pounds. You got Artur Beterbiev, Dimitri Bivol, and then Joe Smith Jr. Joe Smith Jr. is not quite the boxer that Dimitri Bivol is or Artur Beterbiev is. But he is a banger. But again, Joe Smith Jr. is not a perfect fighter. He's a guy that gets hit. He definitely gets hit. I mean, in his last fight, when he won the vacant WBO title in a very closely contested split decision with Maxim Vlasov, my pronunciation, excuse me there, but that was a very close fight. A very close fight. And a lot of people feel that Maxim did enough to win that fight. I got to call it right down the middle. It could have went either way. That fight could have went either way. All things considered, Joshua Buatsi and Joe Smith Jr., that would be a hell of a fight. That would be a hell of a matchup. And if I was Eddie Hearn, that's who I would try to line up my guy for. I would try to line up a fight for Joshua Buatsi to take on Joe Smith Jr. Joe Smith Jr. is not a perfect fighter. He has lost in the past. He lost to Sullivan Barrera. He lost to Dimitri Bivol. Joe Smith Jr. is a world champion, but he's a guy who's there to be hit. He is. I love Joe Smith Jr. He's one of my favorite fighters to watch today. Period. One of my favorite guys to watch. He's got a lot of heart, and he brings it. Joshua Buatsi and Joe Smith Jr., I would love to see that fight. And if I was Eddie Hearn, I would look to line up my guy for Joe Smith Jr. Now, moving on, we're gonna go over the fights I got wrong. First, we're gonna go over one I got dead wrong. I felt that Andrew Maloney was gonna stop Joshua Franco. That's what I felt in my heart of hearts, based upon the last performance when the fight was called the no contest between Joshua Franco and Andrew Maloney. It was their second fight, and that fight really wasn't a no contest. I felt that Andrew Maloney did enough to close the eye of Joshua Franco with his jab. That's what it looked like, and the referee at ringside got it wrong. But in this fight, Joshua Franco left no doubt. He beat the living shit out of Andrew Maloney from pillar to post. He beat Andrew Maloney from pillar to post. Andrew Maloney. After that fight, that's all I have to say about that. Andrew Maloney. Joshua Franco improves to 18-1. Congratulations. I hope that Joshua Franco looks to take that WBA regular title that he has, and I hope he looks to unify or become the super champion. We'll see what happens, but he improves to 18-1. Well done, Joshua Franco. Now, moving on to the worst fight of last weekend, the Guillermo Rigondeaux-John Riel Casimero fight, the main event of the PBC card. on Showtime. And let me tell you something, that fight was awful. It was terrible. It's amazing how we had a Fight of the Year candidate in Egis Kivliauskas and Virgil Ortiz, last Saturday. And on that same day, we had a worst Fight of the Year candidate. Probably far and away the worst Fight of the Year. Probably will definitely be the worst Fight of the Year. And, Rigo and Casimero. The fight looked pretty much what I thought it would look like. But I thought that Rigo would box. I thought he would, stick and move and not just move. I thought he would make him, make him miss and make him pay and not just make him miss and run away. I mean, it was horrible. It was awful. They stunk the joint out. It was terrible. And Casimero, he didn't do anything to cut off the ring. He chased Rigo around like a fool. And I don't think that Casimero did enough to win the fight at all. I thought Casimero did even less than Rigo. I thought that Rigo made Casimero miss a lot, but I thought that Rigo forgot that it was a boxing match. If Rigo would have threw some fucking punches, he would have won that fight. All he had to do was, when he made Casimero miss, was a couple of pitter-patters, a couple of 1-2-1s. That's it. Didn't have to sit down on his punches or exchange 3s and 4s in the pocket or anything like that. He could have literally won this fight by doing exactly what he did and just landing a few more punches. And then it would have been no doubt about it. And it would have been truly, a robbery. I don't think it was a robbery, even though I felt that Rigo may have done enough to win 8 of those rounds. But you gotta be a realist when it comes to boxing. It's a business. And, Rigo is 40 plus. And he's not a fighter with a big following from Cuba. He's not. And he's not someone who's really entertaining to watch at all. To be honest, Rigo says he's not retiring. I think he should, because nobody wants to see what he did last weekend. And no one is going to pay to put him on television. No major promotional sanctioning, major promotional company or sanctioning body is going to do anything for Guillermo Rigondeaux. They're not. It's a snooze fest. Sucks. It sucks. But John Riel Casimero really didn't do enough to win, but he was the incumbent champion going into the fight. He was really the guy that the PBC was behind more. He's younger. He's from the Philippines, which has more boxing fans overall than, Guillermo Rigondeaux does. So, while the decision was terrible, the fight overall was awful. And I can't really classify it being a robbery. I can't really classify it being a robbery. It was a terrible decision. But it was a terrible fight. It was awful. I don't think either one of those guys won the fight. And in that scenario, the younger fighter who holds the title going in, he's going to hold the title going out. And that's what happened. Now, moving on from that, we're going to touch a little bit further on something that I've spoken about in the past, and I'll definitely speak about again in the future, and it's robberies in boxing. Now, there's a difference between a close decision, a bad decision, and a robbery, okay? A close decision that, is Hagler and Leonard. That's a close decision. I love Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and I don't feel 118-110 is a fair scorecard, but the fight's not a robbery. It was a very close fight that could have went either way. And the fight did not take away from the legacy of Marvelous Marvin Hagler. It didn't. It didn't take away a thing from Marvin Hagler. And it didn't take away a thing from Sugar Ray Leonard either. It's not a robbery. It's not a robbery. And I love Marvin Hagler. And I don't like the outcome of that fight really. But I don't hate it. And I respect the performance of Sugar Ray Leonard in that fight. And truth be told, as much as I love Marvin Hagler and as well as he did that night, and as much as I felt that he did enough to win that night, I believe that the performance of Sugar Ray Leonard that night is that much more impressive. And I'll explain to you exactly why. Sugar Ray Leonard was coming off of 2 years of inactivity. He was moving up in weight. And his previous fight to stepping in the ring with the greatest middleweight in the history of boxing, one of the most vicious finishers, hardest punchers, a guy that's going out there for blood, who doesn't want to leave it to the judges, because in the past, after the Vito Antuofermo fight, his first opportunity at a world title, he was not leaving it to the judges at any time in the future of his own volition. Those were his own words. Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and I quote, said, "Judge number 1, judge number 2 right here. These are my judges from now on." That's what he said. Having said that, Ray Leonard came off of 2 years of inactivity, moved up in weight off of a lackluster, mediocre performance in his previous fight to fighting Hagler, and he stepped in the ring and he pulled out the performance of a lifetime. In my opinion, and let me tell you, Sugar Ray Leonard is one of the all-time greats. Marvelous Marvin Hagler as well. 2 of the all-time greatest to ever put on boxing gloves, period. And let me tell you something right now. That was Sugar Ray Leonard's best performance. Better than his performance in the Roberto Duran rematch. Better than his performance against Tommy Hearns in the first Tommy Hearns fight. Better than the performance against Danny Lalonde. That was Sugar Ray Leonard's best performance. It wasn't a robbery. Now, certain fights that were robberies, I'm going to cover a few of them right now to give you, a prime example of what a robbery is. Now, a robbery is Dennis Hogan and Jaime Munguia. Now, that was a fairly close fight, but I didn't see more than 4 rounds of that fight that Jaime Munguia won. And the reason that fight is really a robbery is because Dennis Hogan, what he did that night, and that world title fight for the WBO 154-pound championship of the world, Dennis Hogan will never be a world champion. I'm sorry, Dennis Hogan, I respect you. I actually like you as a fighter, but that was your opportunity. That was your shot, and you should have been awarded. You should have been given your flowers for that performance. That was it. That was it. After that, so what happened in the fight with Charlo, and doesn't look like Dennis Hogan is going to be a world champion, but that night he should have been. That's a robbery. That's a robbery. To go back further in history, Dave Tiberi and James Toney. That was a split decision that they gave to James Toney. James Toney didn't win that fight. That was disgusting. And Dave Tiberi, that was his final fight. He retired after that. He walked away. He did enough that night to become a world champion. And I'm not telling you that James Toney wouldn't have won a rematch. And I'm not telling you that Dave Tiberi's career was better than James. James Toney is an all-time great. Maybe a half a step below Hagler and Leonard, but he's an all-time great in his own right. James Lights Out Toney is also one of my favorites to watch box of all time. I love me some James Lights Out Toney. James Lights Out Toney lost that fight, and that was a robbery because it robbed Dave Tiberi of his dignity, of his world championship opportunity. Dave Tiberi never got that opportunity and didn't want it ever again. Another robbery. Historical. Muhammad Ali versus Ken Norton, number 3. The fight that took place in Yankee Stadium. In New York, they love Muhammad Ali, and they booed him out of the building that night after the decision was read. Ken Norton won that clear head and shoulders above Muhammad Ali. He won at least 3/4 of that fight. He did. He was robbed. And listen, Ken Norton did beat Ali in the first fight, and he wasn't robbed a decision in that fight. And he was awarded the WBC World Heavyweight title after that. However, what he was robbed of was the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. He was robbed of that. Had he been given the decision against Ali that night in Yankee Stadium, he would have been the undisputed world's heavyweight boxing champion. He was robbed of that night. Horrible decision, and that's a robbery. Another robbery. Giant Valuev against Evander Holyfield. Evander Holyfield was robbed that night of being the oldest world's heavyweight champion in history. He was older than George Foreman when George Foreman beat Michael Moorer. He was older, and he would have been the oldest world heavyweight champion. And let me tell you something. That fight was not something to write home about. That wasn't Hagler Hearns. That wasn't Ron Lyle and George Foreman. Nor was it Tyson and Holyfield. It was not that caliber of fight. And it was not Bo Holyfield 1, 2, or 3. No. That fight was not great, but Evander Holyfield won that fight. Evander Holyfield won at least 9 or 10 rounds of that fight against Giant Valuev. And Giant Valuev was awarded a decision. And I believe it was in Europe. I don't believe it was in the US, anywhere in the USSR or Russia, but I believe it was in Germany. But regardless, in that region of the world, even, they booed the decision. They booed the guy who was from that region, the quote-unquote home fighter. They booed that because it was that bad of a decision. That was a robbery. More recently, Barrett and Alonzo, a couple months ago from the United Kingdom. They robbed Alonzo. Alonzo won 9 or 10 rounds of that fight. I didn't see anything that Barrett did. Nothing that Barrett did to say that he won that fight. It's a robbery. It's a robbery. Look, Pernell Whitaker, he was robbed against Jose Luis Ramirez. Robbed. Jose Luis Ramirez didn't win 2 or 3 rounds of that fight, and they robbed him. And that was a robbery because that was the first loss on Pernell Whitaker's career. That's really the only loss that Pernell Whitaker had early on in his career. He lost a controversial decision down the stretch of his career to Oscar De La Hoya, a fight that I felt that Pernell Whitaker won, but that fight could have won either way. I'll admit that. That was not really a robbery. But Pernell Whitaker was robbed against Julio Cesar Chavez. They gave him a draw. He won 10 rounds of that fight. And the 2 rounds that he didn't win, those were swing rounds. Those could have went either way. Julio Cesar Chavez looked like trash in that fight. Trash. And Pernell Whitaker was robbed of the distinction of being the first to defeat Julio Cesar Chavez. Got a draw with him and was the first, chink in the armor. That wasn't a win for Julio Cesar Chavez. But even so, Julio Cesar Chavez, he was given a gift by Richard Steele. I can't really consider it a robbery because the judges didn't rob Meldrick Taylor. But Richard Steele robbed Meldrick Taylor. No doubt about it with 2 seconds to go. But that's a different story for a different day. Everybody knows what happened there. Meldrick Taylor deserved the distinction of being the first to beat Julio Cesar Chavez. And then his teammate from the 1984 Olympic team, the greatest boxing Olympic team in United States history, in my opinion, medaling in 10 of 12 events and getting 9 golds, something like that. Truly incredible for the 1984 men's Olympic team. But Pernell Whitaker and Meldrick Taylor, neither one of those guys was awarded the distinction of being the first to defeat the Mexican legend Julio Cesar Chavez. Unfortunately, Pernell Whitaker was robbed by the judges, and Meldrick Taylor was robbed by Richard Steele. Look, there's a lot of examples of boxing robberies. Emanuel Augustus was robbed more times than I can count. The Burton fight, the Emanuel Augustus versus Courtney Burton first fight, that comes to mind, but there's more than one example of Emanuel Augustus getting robbed. And listen, there's also guys like Sven Adke from Germany who fought predominantly in Germany and was gifted many decisions. Many decisions. Robbed many fighters. The Robin Reed fight comes to mind. That was a robbery. But Robin Reed was still a champion, a world champion, and had success, outside of that fight. So it didn't kill his career, but Sven Adke didn't win that fight. That was a horrible decision. A horrible decision. But Sven Adke was the beneficiary of, many hometown decisions. Guys that were robbed a lot. Emanuel Augustus, Martin Murray. Martin Murray was robbed. Martin Murray should have been a world champion at least twice, if not 3 times. His first world title opportunity, Felix Strum, he was undefeated. They gave him a draw. I watched that fight with Felix Strum. I can't see how Felix Strum deserved the draw. I saw Martin Murray doing everything to deserve a win in that fight. Another, his fight with Sergio Martinez. That comes to mind as well. That was in Argentina, and he knocked Sergio down twice. They only counted one of the knockdowns, which was complete bullshit. Horrible. Absolutely horrible. And, he didn't get the decision. Then there was the fight with Arthur Abraham in Germany, where it looked like, Martin Murray did enough to win, but not according to the German judges again. So, listen, robberies happen in boxing. But a real robbery is when you take something away from someone that they can't get back. Martin Murray was robbed of being a world champion. Axel Schultz against George Foreman. He was robbed of being a world champion. He won that fight. You can go back and watch that fight 100 times. Can't tell me nothing that George Foreman did to beat Axel Schultz. And I love George Foreman. Everybody loves George Foreman. George Foreman didn't win that fight. No way. And Axel Schultz was robbed. He never became a world's heavyweight champion. And he was robbed of the lineal championship. He would have been the lineal champion and a real world's heavyweight champion. Instead, Axel Schultz never became a world heavyweight champion. So look, a real robbery in boxing is not a close decision where the challenger, it looks like he did enough to win, but he loses 7-5, 7-5 on 2 cards, and he gets 7-5. No, that's not a robbery. 115, 113, 113, 115, 113, 115, that's not a robbery. That's not a robbery. And a close fight. A robbery is when the fight is one-sided and they give it to the other guy. A robbery is when the fight is one-sided and a guy is robbed of a world championship and he never gets to become world champion. A robbery truly is when you take something away from a fighter that he's earned and he'll never, never be able to come close to regaining what should have been rightfully his in the first place. That's a robbery. So until we meet again, my friends, I'm your favorite boxing shaman. It's been your pleasure. It's been my pleasure as well. Peace.